What is up, everybody? Isaac here, Civil Engineering Academy. Excited to be with you on another podcast episode. I'm excited about this one. I bring on a student of our course, the Ultimate Civil PE Review Course. You can check that out at civilpereviewcourse.com, that we help pass their PE exam. And she actually has a phenomenal story because she had to ask for reasonable accommodations to extend how much time she had to take the PE exam. And I know many people ask this question or have this question if they can have more time to take the exam. A lot of times time is an issue when you're taking your exam, or maybe you have something going on in your life, whether it's mental. In her case, she was diagnosed with autism, found that out, and because of that was able to get reasonable accommodations to extend the testing window for her exam, which was spread out over 2 days. So I wanted to bring her on and just get her journey as to how she found herself in the world of civil engineering. She practices as a transportation engineer, a professional engineer, passed her PE exam, and just went through this journey of self-discovery and passing this exam. And it's a neat experience. So if you've ever had questions about reasonable accommodation and getting more time for your exams, whether it's FE or PE, and how to reach out to the NCEES, then this is going to be a great episode for you. We're excited to share it with you. So Nicole spills all the details on how that went for her, and you could apply it to yourself if you find yourself in a similar situation. So without further ado, let me bring her on and we will get right to it, and we will see you in a minute. All right, Nicole, we're rocking and rolling. Thanks for joining me today on the Civil Engineering Academy podcast. I appreciate you doing this with me.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think you have a unique journey, and I want to hear about it, and I think others will enjoy hearing about it too. But before we dive into that, why don't you please let us know a little bit about your own background, what you do right now? How did you find yourself into this world of civil engineering in the first place?
Yeah, so originally I wanted to go into civil engineering because 9th grade physical science, we had a project where we designed a roller coaster for a marble, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I was like, I'm going to be a roller coaster designer when I grow up. And so when I started looking at colleges, I was kind of like, okay, should I do mechanical or civil? And I was like, well, there's a lot more things that interest me in civil than mechanical, so I'll go that route. Obviously, there's not a subsection of civil right now that's roller coaster design. So I was like, okay, going through my courses. And I originally wanted to do structures, and then I took my first 2 structure classes, and I was like, this is not for me. Way too much detail and math. So I was like, okay, for the easier option seemed like construction and transportation, and so that's what I did my concentrations in. And then through interning, I ended up at the firm I'm at now, Robert Campbell and Associates, and we're a small firm, so we do a little bit in a bunch of different areas. So most of my design work has been in site and road design, and that's kind of where I'm at now.
That's awesome. So, and where did you go to school?
So I started at Tennessee Tech, and then I transferred and finished at UT Knoxville.
Awesome. And just so you took the FE while you were in school or after school?
So I took the FE. We had to take it as part of our program to graduate. So I took it while in school and I failed it. I didn't study. And then it took me a year after graduating. My boss was like, okay, you need to pass this exam. And so then a year later, I passed the FE the second time I took it.
Wow. What do you feel like it was harder after school than while you were in it? Or I guess you passed while it was after. And just curious, what changed in the prep?
Well, like I said before, the first time I didn't study. I was like, well, let's just see if I can pass it because I have to take it. We didn't have to pass it to graduate, but we just had to take it. And I was closing on my house and a whole bunch of life was going on. So I was like, I'll just take it, whatever. Didn't pass. So then the next time I was like, okay, I'm not going through this again without passing. So I went through the practice exam twice and then was able to pass it without really much of an issue. So,
wow, that's great. So you got that done, and then did you wait 4 years before taking the PE exam?
yeah, so I think 5 years.
5 years?
It ended up being 4 years after I passed the FE, but 5 years after graduating.
Got it. So you definitely had the work experience requirement done.
Yeah.
So good.
I was putting off the exam for sure. I was like, I don't want to do this.
Well, let's talk about that. So, what were your steps to prepare for the PE exam?
So to start off, I was talking to a bunch of engineers who had passed, and I was like, what do you recommend, etc. And everyone was like, you have to say goodbye to everyone you know and like shut yourself in a room for 4 months and do nothing but study and have no life and have no friends. And I was like, well, this sounds terrible. I don't want to do this. It's not worth it. So I procrastinated some more, and finally, like, I recommend it has to be a you decision, not a someone else decision, to commit to studying, because I did like off and on trying to study, and I just wasn't committed. And then finally, I had read your all's email blast about how like fall is a good time. It's like transition, and your brain normally is like, this is school mode. So I was like, okay, I'll start being like actually studying. And I talked to my boss about getting your the ultimate civil PE review course, and he was good with that. So that provided a community of support and a schedule, which I really liked, the homework planner. So I had a plan going forward in my studying and a way to like stay on track. And so that kind of was the kick in the butt I needed to commit and actually really get into studying.
That's awesome. So you found us. How did you find us again?
Through the podcast, actually. Yeah.
Was there an episode that you listened to that you were like, hey, that was a good one? Like what? I'm just curious what inspired you to check us out. I always love hearing this stuff.
I think I was trying to find like civil podcasts to like help with study tips for the PE, and I think that's how I searched y'all and found you. And then you doing your ads for the course on the podcast, I was like, okay, that actually sounds really good.
Sweet. Well, we're glad someone out there listens to us.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, oh man, so I have so many questions. So I'm assuming you took the transportation depth exam, and so you found our course. You're starting back in homework mode. Are there any specific like techniques that you would recommend for someone just starting this journey? That, I mean, you mentioned that you weren't motivated, and we always, you do have to commit. It's very hard, and you got to get back into that school mode. I'm just, did you actually enjoy studying by the end of it? I noticed when I was studying, it was like, I hated this. And then when you started understanding problems, it was like, okay, we're figuring stuff out. It wasn't.
I definitely, like, when I understood it, I was, excited. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. And the videos for sure helped me a ton, because originally I was trying to just study out of books and learned that I'm not that kind of learner and needed the interactive element of the videos. And so that helped a ton. Once again, like having a schedule and committing. I also, part of, I think, what helped me jump into the course was another email blast you had sent about like how our brains do well in like 2-hour increments of studying, and like there's kind of a point of no benefit after that. And I was like, okay, well, I can commit to 2 hours a night, like not what all these people were saying, like 8 hours, don't sleep, and like all this stuff. I was like, I can't do that, but I can do 2 hours.
Perfect.
So yeah, just kind of, I really enjoyed how you guys set up the course for success, and not just like to pass the exam, but to like work with your brain and how you learn and how to absorb material. So I think that helped a lot.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad those emails have been helpful. Like, we
Yeah,
produce
for sure.
a bunch of content. It's hard to get feedback sometimes, but I'm glad it helped you.
Mhm.
When we were chatting via email, you mentioned you have autism, and I'm curious how that played a role not only with your studies, but also with the exam itself. Like, what challenges did you face with that?
So to kind of rewind a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
the last maybe 2-3 years, I had strongly assumed that I had autism, but had never gotten a official diagnosis. And my sister, who also has autism, she had gotten an official diagnosis and was encouraging me to. And I was like, well, it's not going to help much to just have a piece of paper. Like, I know when I do accommodations for myself when I can and things. And leading up to the exam, I've always been like very stressed out with exams. My whole entire life, I have always been the last person in the room to finish an exam, taking the whole time, stressing out about time. It's always like time for me. Like, I'm very smart, but it takes me a long time to think through things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was talking to my sister, and she was like, okay. And I brought up, like, I passed the FE without accommodations. And she was like, okay, but like, what if you didn't have to struggle as much, She's like, what if, granted, this is the last, hopefully, big exam in my life. But she's like, just because you struggled your whole life doesn't mean you have to keep struggling. And so she encouraged me to seek out the official diagnosis. And I used GRASP for that, Global and Regional Autism Spectrum Partnership, and they were phenomenal. They help because it's very expensive to get a diagnosis, and they help do it at a lower cost and virtually all around, for sure the States, maybe the globe. And so I went through them, got diagnosed. I have autism and ADHD. And through that, they were able to help me out with the paperwork to apply for the accommodations for the PE exam. And it was kind of interesting walking through that because there really wasn't a lot of examples. Like, I didn't have anyone I could ask who had accommodations before on the exam. Right. And so it was like a lot of kind of in the dark, not understanding how to go through the process. But basically, I applied for double time accommodations, and after NCEES reviewed my like assessment and everything, they were willing to give me time and a half over 2 days for the exam. Oh. So it ended up being 6 hours, and then one day, and then 6 hours the next day. That's right, neat. Right? With time and a half. So yeah.
I'm just curious, did you have an option or did you just have to request what you thought you needed?
Yeah, so they had a couple options, but it was very like, what do you need? And I was like, well, I've never had accommodations before, so I don't actually know what I need. Right. But I knew that like my whole life I was struggling with the time, so I was like, I know I need extra time. And so that's kind of the route I went.
So I've always heard of accommodations being made, and I'm sure others have too, but that process is probably, like you said, so it's kind of unclear. Once you got the ball rolling, I'm curious how that even happened. Did you just contact the NCEES and explain the situation to them, or is there like a formal way to do this?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember clearly. I had reached out to NCEES, and they had paperwork that had to be sent to the doctor who gave me my diagnosis to fill out. Then once they filled that out, I had to send it back to NCEES. They look over it and compare it to what you're asking for and decide what they want to give you. Then the hardest part was the accommodation had to be scheduled like on its own, like you couldn't use the online website. And so what I ran into is I was like ready to take my exam in December because I was trying to have 2 chances before it changed format.
Right.
And they didn't have any availability for the 2 days until February. And so I was like, okay, I have to pass the first time, because if not, like, all this 4 months of studying is kind of wasted. So thankfully I did, but that was probably the most confusing and frustrating part, was like not knowing when I could take the exam. And like once you schedule it, that's it. There's no rescheduling or anything.
Oof. So they didn't give you a lot of options, or did you have like one specific testing center that you knew you wanted to take it, and they said, you can't schedule here until February, or were there other centers that you could select? Options.
They basically, like, you had to call NCEES, and then they would like call the centers near you and figure out their availability, and then call you back and be like, okay, these are the options. And I mean, I was mostly focused on the Knoxville one, so that's kind of probably why it was less options.
That's amazing. So, I mean, in your experience, was that first 6 hours related to like the breadth portion, like the first half of the exam, or was it mixed up? Like, did you get depth first, or how was that exam experience?
Yeah, so I was also confused about that going in, because once again, there was a lot of miscommunication. And so like the week before the exam, I call and I like make sure everything's okay and set up for my exam, because it was only showing like 1 day, and I was like, no, I'm scheduled for 2. And they're like, yeah, we do this. And they were like, the first day will be the first half of the first part, and the first half of the second, and all this confusing things. And I was totally thrown off, because all my practice exams, I was like, okay, 6 hours for the first half, 6 hours for the second half. And so I was like panicking. So I called NCEES, and they were like, no, it's 6 hours for the first half, break overnight, and then 6 hours for the second half. And so that was good in terms of how I had been practicing. But once again, there was a lot of confusion in how that was going to be.
Yeah, I imagine there would be. I mean, just kind of the whole scenario, you're trying to make sense of how this is going to go down. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
You probably couldn't find any information out there about it. So
yeah, and because everyone's accommodations are different, it's like there isn't a standard to look at,
Yeah. So I'm curious. Do you know of other reasons why people may want to get accommodations? Like, can you have any reason to ask for accommodation, or does the NCEES, because I don't know this, does the NCEES do they have a list of things, or do you just have to ask?
I'm pretty sure they have a list. When I was searching for other people who had experiences online, it seemed like a lot of people with ADHD were trying to decide if they wanted to register for accommodations or not. Obviously, physical accommodations, wheelchair access and things like that are also part of the whole, the same route you would take for mental accommodations.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about the exam then. Did you feel like there was any curveballs thrown at you on your exam, or did you feel like you were well prepared?
So going in, I was the 2 or 3 things that I was so unsure about, or was still struggling with, was retaining walls and trusses. And there were not any retaining walls or trusses on my exam. I was so happy. So that was a huge relief. The big thing that I remember being just totally thrown off with on the first half was 3D problems with point loads, and I just I could not for the life of me figure it out. I was just okay, I can't get this one. So yeah, that was the biggest I have not seen this or practiced this at all.
That makes sense. Were you thrown off by the amount of, were there a lot of theory questions, do you feel like?
I didn't really feel, I was kind of expecting there to be a lot more, just based on everyone else's feedback, but I didn't feel like there were many. But looking back, things that are a simple look at probably are counted as theory questions. Oh, yeah. But it's I guess because I knew them, I didn't think that it counted. I was expecting all the theory to be confusing and not get them.
That makes sense. What about alternative item types? Anything there that threw you off, or was it pretty straightforward?
I might have had one number that
was different.
Yeah, but everything else was multiple choice. So I was also surprised at that.
That's awesome. Well, what tips would you have for someone preparing for the transportation depth exam? Is there anything that you would recommend?
The biggest thing I felt about the transportation half was it was all very easy and plug and chug, but you had to know where to find the formulas, and there's so many references that you have access to, and just knowing where to find the information is the biggest struggle. So I think as long as you know just where to find the information, it'll be easy. It's just, there's 12 or whatever resources that you get, and they're all hundreds of pages. You can't be scrolling through everything during the test. So just knowing where things is at, I think, is the most important.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't just Control F the whole document. You have to search by chapter, and then you can search it.
I want to say I was surprised at that. I think I had been preparing for that, but I think most of them I could Control F.
Wow, okay.
Which awesome. I was, once again, not planning on, but then I was very pleasantly surprised, obviously.
That's great. That's so awesome. Well, knowing your situation, if someone else had autism or discovered that, what tips would you give to them in preparing for this exam?
Definitely take studying at your own pace. Don't compare yourself to others, and just do what you need to do to pass the exam, and realize that perhaps some study methods for other people won't work for you, but there's going to be something that will work for you. And I'm a firm believer that if I can pass the exam, anybody can pass the exam. So you can do it. Don't be afraid to get accommodations if you need it. They're there for a reason, and don't struggle if you don't have to.
That's great. And if someone was debating joining Civil Engineering Academy's course, what would you tell them?
So I can't speak to the new exam, but 110% recommend for the course. I would not have been able to pass without it, and definitely provided the structure and the community and the schedule that I needed to pass. And I didn't want to have to go through taking it more than once. And I'm so thankful that because of the course, I could pass on the first time. So
that's fantastic. How did you take on practice exams? Did you work them like homework problems? Did you take them timed? And did you give yourself more time to go through them? Like, how did you tackle that?
So I went through the course, the civil engineering review course, and used the homework planner. And then that kind of finished in like December. And like I said, I had this like extra month where I was like, okay, I finished the course. I'm kind of ready, but I can't schedule my exam. So that whole last month, I would do practice exams timed on the weekends, like my real exam, which was first half on Friday for me and second half on Saturday. And then during the week, I would do the problems I got wrong on the practice exam as homework. Okay. And just did that every single week leading up to the exam. And that was super helpful.
That's a great strategy to kind of do that way. I was curious because of how much time you had, how you tackled that. And that makes sense that you just mimicked what they gave you. So did you find out that you had accommodations made early in the time frame, like well before you scheduled the exam, I'm assuming? Or was it like, I'm preparing for this, I don't know, and then all of a sudden I got reasonable accommodations?
Yeah, so that was another tricky part of the process because of how late I got my diagnosis. I couldn't obviously apply for accommodations until I had gotten my diagnosis. So I was studying for the exam under the assumption that I didn't have accommodations because I wasn't sure how soon my paperwork would come back from my diagnosis. And then it was like the super close time frame of trying to schedule it before end of December with going back and forth between the doctor and NCEES. So then I was like, not knowing what accommodations I was going to get. And so between December and when I took it in February, I knew the accommodations I had and when I was going to take it. But all leading up until that, I just had no idea what was going on.
Okay.
So it was really hard to study accordingly. Like I was just trying my best as if I didn't have accommodations. But
okay, that makes sense. And just maybe another follow-up question. Did it take a long time once you started the paperwork with the NCEES to get an answer back of whether they would allow you to have reasonable accommodations, or was it relatively quick?
It was relatively quick. I think from when they get your paperwork from the doctor and what accommodations you want, they have like 2 weeks to review it, and then they'll send back what they're allowing, and you can decide if you want to argue against it or accept it.
Got it.
So technically as little as 2 weeks.
Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah.
Well, this is awesome. I think this is great information. I think there's a lot of people that would like a reasonable accommodation, and again, there's not a lot out there. So I think hearing your story is very inspirational to them. Looking back on what you've gone through, is there anything you would do differently in your exam preparation?
In my circumstance, I would have gotten a diagnosis earlier and had that plan for my whole studying instead of all this time crunch. Sometimes I tell myself I wanted to, probably if I could do it again, I would have just waited for the new exam because all the transportation things came very easily to me, but I really struggled with the first half of the exam.
Right.
That being said, I have not taken the new exam, so I can't speak to that. But other than that, I think the review course was phenomenal. And then the whole month leading up to it, just the practice exams really helped.
Awesome. Well, maybe my last question, is there any other tips or advice you'd give to somebody preparing for this exam that you haven't shared yet?
I don't think so. Just don't try and do it unless you're committed. Like, you yourself be committed, because other people can't like give you that commitment. So it's not going to work unless you want it, which I know you all have talked about as well in your course. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think in our introductory video in the course, I try to hammer that a little bit. Like, at the end of the day, you as the engineer have to put the pencil to paper, right? And even though we can explain problems in videos, if you're not doing them or trying them, practicing them, you're not going to absorb it. You can watch it all day, but you gotta do it. So great tips, great advice. And if anybody's interested, you mentioned our newsletter a ton. If you're not signed up for that, we give this advice to anybody that's signed up. You can check that out. You can find it at civilengineeringacademy.com/newsletter, and our course at Civil PE Review Course. As of this recording, we should have hopefully a couple courses out that have been with the updated specs. It's coming. So it takes a while. It's like studying for the PE. For us to turn this ship, it's just like, it takes a while, so it's going to happen. But anyway, Nicole, thank you for sharing your journey with us. I think it's very inspirational, and I am excited for you and your future as a civil engineer.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you later.
Thanks.